In a previous video, we talked about the importance of cache and how it can, the application of cache can really speed up your application and provide more scale to systems. Now we want to talk about using cache within Rock and how you can apply that concept to make sure that what you're doing inside of Rock will remain fast and scalable. And so let's just jump right in and take a look at how we can do this. Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at is a sample page that we have here. This page has 3 different HTML blocks on it. It has a welcome block at the top. It has a block that's pulling some content channel items into it. And then below is just some footer text. Now, this page might be loading acceptably fast for your eye, but how can we research the performance of this block? Well, let's walk through a simple debug of this. Now, I've intentionally put some performance issues into this, so I actually had to work hard to get this to be so slow. So don't take this as an indication for normal Rock speed. So the first thing I can do is I can go down into the admin toolbar, and we see many things that we're used to down there, but we can see that that the page load time, and that is the server's load time, not on the client, but on the server, it's taking like 5.5 seconds. So again, this is very abnormal speed in Rock. And so that's the first clue. It's like, oh, wow, something's not right with that. Let's take a quicker look. So if we look at that a little bit closer and I click on that page load time, it'll actually reload the page and put this URL query string parameter into the browser for us, which is show debug timings equals true. Now that click down there, you actually have to be on version 11 to have that. If you're on an older version, you can just type that show debug timings equals true yourself into the query string, and you'll get something very similar to what I'm going to show you. It's not nearly as pretty, but it actually has the same data. It's just harder to look at it. It's much more technical looking and programmer looking, and we've polished that in version 11. So anyways, it puts that query string up there, and then if I scroll down to the bottom, you'll see this kind of debug information, and it's creating a little bit of a waterfall chart of where the time is taking. So at the top, you can see some initialization. It's getting the current user, getting the current person, doing some security checks, setting up context on the page, lots of just deep technical stuff, trying to determine if you have the rights to administrate the page. And then we're starting to get into where the blocks are happening. So blocks have 2 events primarily, an on init and an on load. On inits are usually pretty fast. That's just some setup for each block, and then the on load is where the data access is coming. So what I'm going to do is we're just going to scroll down here a little bit. Oh, and there we go. There we see what the problem is. That HTML block on load is taking 5,000 milliseconds. And again, 1,000 milliseconds is a second. So, 5.2 seconds right there. That's probably, the issue, obviously the issue. Above it, the other one block, that feature header, is taking 50 milliseconds. So, I'm not going to worry about that right now, but I still probably want to come back and address that one. 50 milliseconds is really not much, but hey, we're going to try to optimize as much as we can. But for now, we're going to take care of that 5.2. So it's an HTML block. So I'm going to go into the block properties of that block, and I'm going to see that, hey, there is no cache duration here. So it's this content is not being cached. So shame on us. It's obviously doing something expensive and taxing on the server. In this case, I had to work hard to get it to do that. But I'm going to put a value in here of 3,600. So that's the number of seconds you want that cached for. And so that's, an hour. I'm going to say I'm going to cache it for an hour. Now, the value you put in there, you really want to think through that. I said an hour. A lot of times you can cache it for a lot longer than that. And that's often what you want to do. But I'm just going to put it in there for an hour, and we're going to see what happens then. So we kind of go from this chart to this chart. And it's deceiving. At the top is on the before. We see that 5.2. The waterfall chart, it kind of expands and contrasts based on the total load time. So now the feature block is the slow block, and you can see that main content on after the first time it gets cached is 0 because we're pulling it from RAM. And remember, RAM is about 100 feet away versus getting out of the database is 500 miles. So huge difference. And now we might want to come back and do the same thing to that feature. So you can see the big difference here. Now, I do want to remind you that the first time that someone comes to this page, someone's got to pay the cache tax. Okay, in that case, the first person's going to have to pay that 5 seconds, and then it's going to be in cache, and everybody else is super fast. There's ways to get around the cache tax, and you're going to want to look at persisted data sets. We have a video on that too, but that's the way to get past the cache tax. But mostly the cache tax is going to be very small. It's going to be like a half a second, maybe a second. I mean, that's a big one. It's usually not going to be as dramatic as 5 seconds. If you have a 5 second cache tax, you need to go do something else. You need to move on to another tool in your toolbox. So incredible result there. 5 seconds to 0. Okay, so we're back looking at our page here, and we're already loving the fact that it's loading way fast. But if we look now at our blocks, the top block is still 60 milliseconds. We got this one down to 0, or it's rounded down to 0, but in this case I'm going to round it up because there is some time there. And then the bottom one is only 1 millisecond too. So I still think we could probably do better. I still think we can get rid of that 60 milliseconds. But before we talk about how to get that out, let's look at the benefits of caching. There's 2 benefits to caching, and so far we've only talked about one of them. So the first one is speed. Pages are quicker to load, improving the experience that the individuals using our sites are going to experience. But the other one is scale. With less resources needed to load each page, servers can handle many, many more requests. And we don't want to undervalue the scale component of caching. We always think of the speed component of caching. And sometimes you'll look at a page, and as you use it, it actually feels fast enough to you, but consider it under load. Maybe it's only taking half a second. You're like, that still feels good to me. Or maybe it's a second and you're still okay with that. But at scale, with 1,000 people loading that page at the same time, your server may fall over and the speed might be diminished to 3, 4, 5 seconds because of that. But the cache, you put that on there, it's going to increase scale in a really, really big way. So let's look at an example of scale and how using cache, even a very small cache, might seem odd, but is actually really important. So say I have this lava here, this HTML here. It says the next service is at, and it tells me the date and time of the next service. This is commonly used in a lot of church websites. And in this case, we're using some Lava to do this. There's a really cool Lava shortcode called scheduled content. And basically what you do is you just give it a schedule ID from Rock, and it's going to go determine, is this schedule live or not? And there's a lot of configuration. Go look at the documentation for it. But in this case, I want to show the content regardless of whether it's live or not. And it gives me a nice little parameter variable to Boolean to tell me if it's live or not. And if it's live, I'm going to say, hey, services are live. And if not, I'm going to say the next service is at, and it gives me another variable that tells me the next date time. This is a really, really nice shortcode. It really saves a lot of processing and a lot of logic, but it's not the fastest shortcode. It has to go out to the database, read schedule ID 1, bring it back to the web server. Then it has to do an iCal parsing on that to determine the pattern, the reoccurrence pattern. It has to determine when the next one is now it. I mean, you get it. It takes, maybe an eighth of a second to do that. And when it's just you, that feels fine. But when you have this maybe on your homepage and everybody's coming to your homepage, Sunday at 9 o'clock to watch the service, that's a lot of scale, right? So what you might say is well, let's cache that. But you might hesitate and say, well, but I want the countdown. Maybe it's going to have a countdown. I want the countdown to be accurate. I don't want it to be like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or an hour off. That would be very unhelpful if it's an hour off. And so you might say, well, but can't we cache it for a minute? But you might think, well, what's that going to do? It's only going to cache it for a minute. Well, let's just say it takes a half a second to load this. And let's just say it's loaded 200 times a minute, at Sunday at 9 o'clock. Caching it for 1 minute saves 199 duplicate calculations. So now you can see the empathy for the computer and say, well, yeah, even if we cache it for 1 minute, we're going to save a ton of processing. Not only that, we're going to make this very fast for all the people. Someone might hit the cache tax of 500 milliseconds, half a second, but 199 people will not see that, and they're going to get it instantaneously. So this is another good example of when you want to consider cache for scale as well as for performance. Now we showed you the HTML block. There's several other blocks that have the same exact caching settings: internal communications, RSS feeds, and group list personalized lava. So same thing works in a lot of those blocks. The content channel blocks also have caching, but their caching is a little bit different. So this is a content channel view block that we have in the demo data, and in the core product when it ships, it just shows you different message series on the external website. So if I were to look at the block settings here, notice that there's an output cache duration here. And this is very similar to the setting that's in the HTML block. This is the number of seconds that the cached output will be put in. The output will be put into cache. Now, you don't want to use this if you're personalizing the content, because it'll get cached with that person's name in it, and that would not be very fun when you come and the next person's being called a different name. So be careful with that. If you have personalization, you can use the item cache. And so the output cache takes the items from the database, runs lava across it, and caches that output. The item cache only takes the items from the database, puts that in cache, and still runs lava across it. But you're saving that database read, and that's actually where the majority of the performance hit's going to be. So item cache is not as fast as output cache, but it allows you to personalize the data, and it's still a huge savings in terms of speed. So this is a very powerful cache mechanism within the content channel blocks. And we find that most people don't enable this cache. And when they do, it's night and day performance difference and night and day scale achieved on their server. The content channel item view, the block that shows you the results for one content channel item, it has the same settings. So it has an item cache and an output cache. So be sure to use that. There's actually caching in Lava now too, and has been for at least 2 major releases. And so there's these cache commands. And so let's look at how those work. So let's say we have this lava, which is basically an entity command where we're going to get all the groups of type 25. We're going to iterate over them and just put out the name of the group. So maybe I want to cache that. If I wrap that statement inside of a cache command and give it a key, in this case, SG group list, and then a duration, now I can use this lava. It'll cache it for an hour, and we can use this in different places and speed up the performance of that lava. And so that's really awesome. But what happens if my lava template said that, hi, current person.nickname? The way it's written right now, it's going to get cached with the first person's name in there, and that's not what we want. That's like bad cache. But there's a way around that, and that's called 2-pass cache. So we're going to walk you through how this works, but you can notice that the lava template's a little bit different. It's using some raw commands, And if you're familiar with that, is raw commands takes whatever's in between them, and when it parses the lava, it puts that unparsed data then into the template. So let's look at how this would work. Okay, here's our original lava template. So the first time this comes, it's going to run that lava template, and it's going to take the output of that and put it into cache. So if our original lava looked like that, that's just what we've been looking at the last 2 slides. The first time it gets run, it's going to look like this. So it's done the expensive database query, it's merged in the groups, and it's taken whatever inside those raw tags, and it's put that into the template. And this is what's cached. And now anytime someone comes through on that, it's called 2-pass, right? So on the second pass, this is what's displayed. So we're basically caching a lava template that'll get run again on the second pass. So you have the speed and the personalization all built in, and that's a great thing. So you have all these caches now. Now it can be a little bit frustrating because you're like, okay, well, everything's cached, and sometimes when I change something, I don't want to wait the hour, or maybe you have it set for 4 hours and you made like an important change, and now you need to invalidate the cache. And so let's show you how you can do that. So if you go under CMS Configuration Cache Manager, you'll see that there's these cache tags, and you can create these tags and then basically group different caches under these tags. And if you hit the little eraser, it's going to invalidate the cached items for you. Okay, well, we haven't really shown you how to use the cache tags, but right here, what you want to do is you want to create them. So just give them names. Nothing will be linked to them in the beginning, but I'm going to show you how to link things. And once things are linked to them and you hit the eraser, it's going to invalidate the cache and allow you to then clear the cache in very small targeted ways. Now, how you pick your cache tags is really important. You want to create like a taxonomy of them. So let's just say your project is working on an external website. You're probably going to want a cache tag for the whole site. So every cache on that site is going to have a cache tag. And then you might also create cache tags for certain pieces of the site. So maybe the youth pages, the children's pages, and maybe the home page. And then you're going to use these cache tags on the blocks. So going back to the content channel view block, with the cache tags defined, now you'll see down here that we have the cache tags listed, and I can check which cache tags I want tied to this block. Okay, so now that you've linked those to these tags, and if any one of those tags gets invalidated, then the cache gets flushed. And so you can quickly and easily flush the cache. And so this allows you to set longer and longer cache durations without having to worry that your hands are stuck and you have to flush the entire rock cache, which is an option, but you kind of prefer not to do that. So if you do need to flush the entire rock cache, you would go under the admin toolbar under the information icon there, and there's the big clear cache. When you clear that cache, so you're clearing all of Rock's internal caches. Not the end of the world if you do that, but Rock will start to operate slowly for a few page loads in different areas as it rebuilds that cache. Again, it's not the end of the world, but it's not what you want to have to go do. We spend a lot of time optimizing Rock's cache so you don't have to do that. But occasionally, if you didn't set a cache tag and you don't want to wait, you can also go edit the block. Anytime you edit a block setting, it invalidates the cache. So you can do that trick. But I guess the big sledgehammer is this button, but you rarely, if ever, have to use that. So those are the basic caching tools within Rock. There's others. Persistent data sets is another one. Go watch that video. And there's some other more advanced ways of doing cache. But this will give you an incredible amount of speed boost and scalability on your site when you use it correctly.